man. All right, I've told this story a few times, but I guess we'll do it again. So we've talked a lot about kind of how I ended up. I know we were talking about it last night. I was talking to Josh about it, like how I ended up with Beachbody. But usually when I tell this story, I backtrack quite a bit, and it seems like every time I tell this story, I backtrack a little bit further. But it's important because there is a little bit of a, there's a lesson in all of it, I guess. Because, so I'm going to backtrack to when I was 5. Wow. Don't worry, we'll jump ahead really quick. But there is an important story in there. When I was 5, I was at my mom's apartment with my older brother and sister. And we were playing, and I kept telling my mom my hip hurt. I was like, my hip hurts, my hip hurts. She's like, fine, fine, fine. So when I went to bed, we all go to bed, still in pain. I woke up in the middle of the night, went to walk to my mom's room, fell in the living room from the pain. My mom came out, picked me up, brought me in her bed. We get up the next morning, and my brother and sister are getting ready to go to school, and my mom's like, Autumn, come on, you gotta get up, you gotta get up. And I was like, my hip hurts, my hip hurts. She thought I was just kind of like, not faking it, but she didn't think it was that big of a deal until I went to get out of bed. And I stepped out of bed and I collapsed on the floor, screaming bloody murder and pain. And my mom was like, oh shit, something's wrong. Called my dad and was like, I'm rushing her to the hospital, meet us there. So we lived in Ohio, they rushed me to Rainbow's Babies and Children. I couldn't sit in the car, I had to lay down because just to sit was too much pain on my hip. I was in the hospital for a week. They ran every test humanly possible on me to try to figure out what was wrong. I mean, needles in my thigh like this big. They were like, is it a flesh-eating bacteria inside her body, eating the muscle? Like, no idea. Every test possible. Remember that to a T. It was Christmas. Santa brought me lifesavers. It was great. And I got a lot of coloring books. Never figured out what was wrong with me. They sent me home a week later on crutches, and it just got better. But they told my parents, they're like, look, she might never walk again. That was the first thing they said. And I did. And they were like, but she really shouldn't do like sports because since we don't know what caused it, we don't know what could cause it to start back up again. So even though my dad would like let us, like, you know, I was allowed to go play and everything, it wasn't like I was kept in a box, but I wanted to dance. And he was like, no, you can't dance. We don't know what's wrong with your hip. And I wanted to take gymnastics. And it was like, no, you can't take gymnastics. We don't know what was wrong with your hip. And after about 7 years of begging, I was in 8th grade and he finally let me sign up for dance classes because it was like, okay, clearly nothing's wrong with you, you're fine. So it wasn't until I was 14 that I actually got to start dancing, and that's all I ever wanted to do was be a dancer. So I started late, like, so it was the first time I guess ever in my life that I had to deal with that setback of like fighting my way to get to do what I wanted to do. And starting late, so being behind the 8 ball of everybody else that was in that dance class who had been dancing for 7 years already. And I was like, but I want to do what they're doing and I want to compete. So I had to work a little bit harder to get myself up to their level. And I feel like that's kind of how my whole life has been. It's been 2 steps forward, 3 steps back to get to where I'm going. I wanted to be a dance major, so auditioned, did not get into my top choices because again, I was behind the 8 ball in terms of ballet and everything else, and that was the strong point of what you needed to be able to do when you went to college. So it's okay, I went to a smaller performing arts school, and I was just telling Hillary and some of them earlier when I got here this morning, like I had awesome dance teachers growing up that were nothing but motivational, positive reinforcement right up until I got to college. And my ballet master was a bastard, for lack of a better word. He was brutal to me. This is like the epitome of somebody who puts you down on a daily basis and tells you you're not good enough, you'll never amount to anything. Ended up injuring myself in college, bulging disc in my lower spine, so it was another one of those setbacks where it was like, okay, well I went to college to be a dancer. And in my senior year, they're like, the doctor was like, if you keep dancing, you're gonna end up in back surgery at 20 years old and you'll probably never dance again. So it was like either finish my dance degree and risk back surgery, or not finish my dance degree and try to figure out what the hell to do with my life because I was gonna be a dancer. I picked the latter. I was like, okay, I gotta figure out what else I'm gonna do with my life. So I left school for a semester. I went back. I thought about being a physical therapist. That wasn't going the way I wanted it to. I left again, and I was like, I'm just not finishing. Like, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm not spending $30,000 a year trying to figure it out. I'm going to go figure it out, and then I'll go back if I need to go back. So I moved to California. At the time, I moved in with my mom. Most people don't know, I actually don't talk to my mom anymore. I haven't talked to my mom in about 4 years. But at the time, I was still talking to her. I moved in with her. That lasted for about 8 weeks. And I was like, this is not working. So I went back to St. Louis. So again, it was like two steps forward. I got to California, that's where I wanted to be. But my living situation wasn't working out. I couldn't afford to be living on my own yet. So I went back. I went back to St. Louis again. And I was like, I'm just gonna save for a year. And I worked 7 days a week, double shifts, waiting tables, and saved every penny I could save to move back. And move back a year later. So I'm kind of the person, like when I put my mind to something, like if I decide that that's what's gonna happen, that's just what's gonna happen. There's no other option. And like, I just won't stop until it happens. That's a mindset I think my dad taught me, because I was raised by my dad, that you just go for it as hard as you can until you make it work. So I went back. I was pursuing acting. I was dancing a little bit at the time because I could still dance. I just couldn't dance like 10 hours a day anymore. And I was waiting tables, and I was getting burnt out on waiting tables because I had been doing it for like 10 years. I put myself through college. I paid for my college waiting tables. And I was like, I gotta do something else. I'm not meant to sit at a desk. What else am I gonna do? So that's kind of how I found fitness, because I was like, I'm not gonna teach dance, even though I had taught dance in the past. I didn't want dance, I wanted that to be for me. Like I said, that ballet teacher in college crushed my self-confidence. Rushed it. I stopped dancing for 3 years. I wouldn't step foot in a dance class. I was like, terrible, I suck at it, I should have never done it, not happening. And I remember I was in my like little studio apartment one day. I had a calendar that had Britney Spears on it, because I love her. And I was like, damn it, I really miss dance. Like, I want to go back to class. And I got online, and we have a school called the Edge Performing Arts Center in California. It's like the best of the best. And I was like, I'm gonna go to the Edge. Like, that had always been my dream, to go take class there. And I had been in LA for a year, and I still hadn't gone. I get online, and I literally went back to beginner jazz, like Jazz 1 class. Like, this is a class I would have taken when I was like 15 years old. And I was like, yeah, that's where I belong, Jazz 1. Went to that jazz class, and lo and behold, I found another amazing teacher who like motivated and inspired and was not like the negative person that I had spent the last 4 years with. And he was fantastic. I met a very good friend in that class. She became like one of my best friends out in LA. And I was in his class for like the next 2 years. So it was like, I kind of got my confidence back. Like, but I had to start at the beginning. We were talking about this, about sometimes you got to go down to go up. And that was for me, like I had to put myself back in a beginner class to feel like I could rise back up to where I was. And so I was dancing, I was waiting tables. I met the man who I ended up marrying. He was a lot older than me, he's 12 years older than me. And he was like, you need a real job. Like, you have to have a career for us to get married. You can't be doing this whole acting thing. And I was like, I was young, I was impressionable, so I was like, okay. So I gave up everything I wanted to do, like the dancing, the acting, and I was like, I gotta have a real job. I actually went and became an assistant for a casting director for like 3 months, most miserable 3 months of my life. So while I was being a casting director or assisting that, I was like, what else am I gonna do? This is not gonna come. Like, I will hate life. So I started researching personal training certifications. I ended up going with the National Academy of Sports Medicine, and 3 months later, I had my certification, and I was like, I'm quitting this job. There's no way I can do this. This is miserable. I'm gonna be a trainer. And he was like, okay, but there were still stipulations. He's like, I don't want you working at a gym, so like in-home training, because he didn't want me working with guys. So I was like, that's fine. So I found a company. Actually, I've always had a passion of working with kids too, and this company did a lot with women and a lot with kids. So I was doing in-home training, working with women, working with kids, loved it. Learned a ton over the 3 years that I was with them. Went on to get more certifications, became a specialist in pre and postnatal fitness. Throughout that, I had my son, and along the way, my husband was like, he wasn't happy at his job. He wanted to switch companies. And he ended up applying to be a manager for Equinox, and he got hired as a manager for Equinox, but he got hired for a management position in Dallas, Texas. And he's like, what do you feel about moving? And I was like, well, all right. My mom lived in Dallas. We were still talking at the time. I was like, maybe this is just what we're supposed to do. Like, we can have a little bit better family life out there, you know, because it's cost of living's way less. So I was like, okay, I agree to. And I remember, like, we packed up the apartment, and I was standing in my apartment sobbing. And I was like, I cannot believe we're leaving LA. Like, this is horrible. We moved, and I cried every single day we were there. And my mother was no help. That's all I'll say about that. We were there for 5 weeks, and my husband came home from work one day, and I looked at him and I said, I'm going back with or without you. And I was like, at the time, I was on my own. I had my own personal training business in home that was doing very well when we left. And I was like, we've been gone for 5 weeks. If I don't go back now, I will lose everything I built. I was like, I'm out, and I'm taking Dominic with me. You can come, you can stay, I don't care, I'm going. And he's like, well, I'm gonna stay because you know, I have to have a job. And he's like, I'll wait, I'll get a transfer as fast as I can. Great, packed up the car and drove back the next day. And that was it, I was on my own, taking care of Dominic, hired a nanny, and went back to doing my business. So I was up at 4:30 every morning, and I would work 14-hour days. I would come home and see Dominic in between, and that's just what I did. And my husband came back 3 years later, and I had kind of started to have the idea for portion control a little bit, started bouncing ideas off of him. He was never big on me being an entrepreneur. In the midst of all that, I started writing for Brooke Burke and her website. I started doing like videos with her for her website. I ended up going to work at Equinox, so I took on some more celebrity clients there. Life was getting good. In the midst of all of that, things were not going really well between he and I. We're like, we're not meant to be together. So we got divorced. So it was always this yin and this yang for me of like, things would be really good, but then there'd be this like really crap side happening at the same time. In the midst of all of that, I started developing Change My Plate, which is now, what you guys know, is 21 Day Fix. It took 2 years to develop. Obviously, I didn't have Carl Deichler money backing me at the time, so it was a little slower process. And I was doing, like I said, still working 14-hour days, still taking care of my son. A lot of opportunities were coming up, and then a lot of doors were getting slammed in my face. I was up to replace Jillian Michaels on Biggest Loser. 4 months of auditioning. Wow. Came down to me and Anna Kournikova. And at the time I didn't know it was Anna Kournikova. The casting director called me one day and she's like, I am pushing so hard for you. They're gonna make the announcement next week. And all I'm gonna tell you is if they don't pick you, you'll understand why when they make the announcement. I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And then they announced it and it was Anna Kournikova and I was like, are you kidding me? This is a tennis player. She knows nothing about fitness and she's not even good at tennis. Like, she was terrible on the show and everybody hated her. And I was so angry about it. Like, I was so angry about it. And in the midst of all of that, I lost the person that had been my best friend for 10 years because I finally launched Change My Plate. I launched it on the Hallmark Channel on a show called Home and Family. 2 months later, Beachbody called, and the long and short was that obviously they loved it and we signed a contract. And no sooner did we sign the contract, the person that had been my best friend for 10 years, who's in the fitness world, but in the dance side of the fitness world, was, I guess you could say, bit by the jealous bug that my career now took off higher than hers. And just turned into a different person. So the one person that had been my support system, that stood by my side at my wedding, and literally held one of my legs as I pushed my son out, bailed and was like, oh, you're doing better than me, and just was gone. And I was like, okay, so that just happened. Like, I'm divorced, I'm taking care of my kid on my own, I'm working 14-hour days. I signed the contract, but I had no idea what the contract would actually lead to. Actually, yeah, okay, I'm in the right order. Sorry, I'm making sure in my head I'm doing this in the right timeline. So we signed the contract, we start working on 21 Day Fix. And they tell me, now I still am working at Equinox and I still have all my private clients. And they're like, we're gonna start the test group. It's gonna be 9 weeks. I'm like, okay, and they're like, you have to be here to teach all of the classes. So it was 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon and then 1 on Saturday. So Monday through Saturday, I was driving back and forth to Santa Monica, so it's a 30-minute drive. So I would drive there, I would teach a class, I would see all my private clients, I would train my clients at Equinox, I would drive back to Santa Monica, I would teach the night class, I would drive back, I would pick my son up from school, I'd put him in daycare at Equinox, I'd have my last 2 clients, and we'd get home at like 8 o'clock at night, and I'd get up and I'd do it all over again. But my ex-husband lived a mile down the road, so we took turns. So we both saw him every day. It was like he took him to school, I picked him up from school, we had a good thing going. And at the end of 9 weeks, they're like, we're going to do another round. And I was like, oh, okay. So I got to call all my private clients, and I'm like, sorry guys, it's going to be 3 more weeks till I'm back. And in 12 weeks, they're like, we're going to do another round. Call them all, and I'm like, I'm sorry you guys, blah, blah. Like, if you need another trainer, let me know. To the point where I finally had to get rid of all my private clients, which is a hit money-wise because, you know, the contracts were signed, but that was no guarantee that the program was going to do anything fantastic. We had no idea. So that was nerve-wracking, but I was like, all right, that's what we have to do. And that test group went for 33 weeks.
Wow. Wow.
So what was supposed to be 9 weeks turned into 33, and it was fantastic. So we get through the end of the test group, and we get through developing the product. We go into casting, and we cast the background. We go into rehearsals for the 21-day fix. And the week of rehearsals, so we started rehearsing on a Monday, we were done rehearsing on a Friday. Saturday I was competing. So that was my 3rd competition that I was ever doing. Yeah, I like to put a lot on my plate. Because why not just do one thing at a time? I'm like, I'm going to do it all at one time and see if I can handle it. We started rehearsals, and 2 days in, I get a call from my ex-husband, like, right as we're breaking for lunch. And he tells me, I just lost my job. And I was like, okay, what? And we're talking about it for a few minutes. And now his family lives in San Diego, 2 hours away from where we are in LA. And I just had this like gut feeling. I was like, oh, he's leaving. And I said, are you moving back to San Diego? And he said, yes. And I said, when do you leave? And he goes, next Monday. And I was, you're leaving in 8 days? Yes. I want to take Dominic with me. I was like, you could stop right there. We're not taking my child anywhere. So if you choose to leave LA, you're going by yourself. And he's like, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'll figure it out. And he was like, okay, well, and I was like, we'll work out the details later. I'm in the middle of rehearsal. I can't deal with this right now. We get off the phone, and I go find Stephanie Saunders, who's like, helps me develop all the products. And she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, room. Let me go in a room, and I just break down. I'm carb depleted. I'm exhausted. I'm in the midst of I'm eating tilapia, and I was like, oh, my life is falling apart. She's like, honey, your life is not falling apart. Like, it's just getting started. The good news is you can afford to do this without me. Like, it's okay. You and Dominic will be just fine. And I was like, all right, pull myself together, go back out to rehearsals. Nobody has a clue what's going on except her. And rehearsals are killing me because the director I had worked with before. I was actually a background talent for her when I was pregnant with my son on Yoga Booty Ballet, Baby on the Way, another Beachbody program that nobody knew I was in. It's funny, they were all like just figuring this out a few months ago that I was in. And so we're in rehearsals, and she's like literally treating me like the background talent, like I don't know what I'm doing. And I was getting like so frustrated and so irritated with it. And again, I'm carb depleted and dehydrated, and I'm exhausted, and I'm like, my head is spinning from the phone call I just had. And I'm just like, I just gotta get through it. I just gotta get through it. So I get through it, we get to the end of the week, everything's great. I go compete the next day. Actually, here's the funny thing. I go to registration Friday night. I had had my car for 5 weeks. I had just bought myself a new Mercedes. I had my car for 5 weeks. I go to registration, everything's great, register. I'm like, yes, I'm gonna go home, rehearsals are over, everything's great. And a motorcycle takes the front end of my body and keeps going. And I was like, come on! Why is this happening right now? Whatever, car got fixed, I competed, I took 6th, it was great. I had 2 days off, and we go into filming the DVDs. So we get on set for the first day, and everybody's like, okay, everybody is there. I mean, everybody. Like, there's like 50 people on set. Carl's there. I'm like, can somebody put him in another room? Like, I don't want to look at Carl being like, okay, I hope I don't F up right now. Thank God he did. He went in the back room. It was great. So they're like, okay, Autumn, we're just going to like do this once, and we'll see how it goes. And I'm like, great, let's go. Like, in my mind, it's no big deal. And in their mind, they're all like, oh, this is going to take all day. So they yell action. We go through the whole 30 minutes, and they yell cut. And I look up, and everybody's just kind of standing there quietly, like with this blank stare on their face. And I'm like, oh, shit. Like, I sucked that bad. Like, this is a problem. And the director comes out of the back room. She calls me Boo now. So she walks out, and she's like, Boo. And I'm like, what? Is it that bad? And she's like, never in all of my years that nobody ever nailed it in one take. And I was like, victory, finally, right? And I was like, oh, all right, well, cool. You ready to go again? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, great. We sailed through all of the filming, and they're like, yay, it's in the can. That means your product's actually going to go through. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, yeah, there's no guarantee your product will actually launch until the workouts are filmed.
Oh, no.
News to me. I assumed the day we signed the contract that my product was going to be launched. So that was like, I'm glad nobody told me that until after the fact. I was like, oh, no pressure or anything. Right. But we finished filming, and I had 6 months till it actually came out. We filmed in July. We announced to the coaches in September. So even then, it was like 3 months till we announced to you guys. And then it was another 3 months of waiting for it to come out. And it was like this huge nerve-wracking period of like, what is my life gonna be? Will it do well? Should I quit Equinox? Should I not quit Equinox? Like, do I try to get my private clients back? Like, just kind of limbo. And then obviously we launched, and we sold in 8 hours what they projected to sell for the week, and we sold in the week what they projected to sell in 2 months. And then you all hated me because we were on back order, as if I was shipping it from my garage. I was like, I have no control of it. What you guys don't know is that all those containers come from China, and the Chinese New Year had just started the day we launched. So that happened. So that's kind of the story on how I ended up here with you guys now. There's always, for me, it's always been a series of unfortunate events that have led me right to where I'm supposed to. Yeah. And it's only been in like the last 2 years that I can honestly say I recognize that, because any other time it would be like the woe is me, why is this happening, like when is it going to get any better, like there would be so many calls to my friend just sobbing on the phone and being like, I'm so tired, like when is it going to happen? But I think it was interesting. We had, I don't know if any of you guys were at the Miami Super Saturday, like last year. Carl was up on stage and somebody asked him like who his influences were. And he went through like this list of people he had that were like awesome to him and that were all his like big influences, taught him and guided him and blah, blah, blah. So then I get on stage and they're like, what were yours? And I was like, my story's not the same. Mine was the exact opposite. Like mine was a bunch of people telling me you can't do it. Like mine was people telling me I was crazy when I moved to LA. Mine was the issues with my mom telling me I should marry a man with money. That would make me happy. And I was like, there will be a tell-all book, I'm sure, one day. But anyways, but I just always had people being like, you know, saying no, saying you're not good enough. And I just happen to have the personality, I think, that like, if you say you can't, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna show you. I don't know if that's always a good attitude to have. Sometimes that's backfired on me. But yeah, that's just kind of how I am. So it led me here. There was a lot of falling. There was a lot of picking myself back up. But that's what you have to do, is you have to pick yourself back up. Like, there will always be downfalls. It happens now, you know, everybody assumes that it's like sunshine and rainbows in my life 24/7, and it is more often than not, but there's still the not, you know, like I was dating somebody for a while and then the timing wasn't right and we broke up, and I was like in the midst of all of this 21-day fix extreme stuff, and all I wanted to do was sit on my couch and eat ice cream and cry, and I was like, hey, you can't do that because you have a kid to take care of and a job. And I was like, you know, that's just what you do. And we were saying it earlier that, you know, a lot of people want to use their excuses, or my life's too busy, or this is happening. There's always going to be something. Back in August 9th, I woke up and I had an email, and the email was from my high school sweetheart's mother, and I knew the second I saw her name on it that it was bad. We hadn't talked to him in like 10 years, 12 years, but the last I talked to him, he had a drug problem. He was just spiraling down a bad road. And when I saw her email, I was like, this is not good. I was like, one of two things. She's either going to say she saw my infomercial and congratulate me, or she's going to tell me he's dead. And all the email said was, can you call me? And I was like, he's dead. Sure enough, I called her, and he had died of a drug overdose 2 minutes earlier. And even though I hadn't talked to him in 10 years, it was somebody that had been in my life for 8 years. She moved me into college. Like literally his mom picked me up from the airport and moved me into my dorm. That was a devastating blow. And I was on my way to Vancouver the next day. I literally had this battle of like, do I go to his funeral or do I go to the coach's event in Vancouver? And I was like, I mean, I debated it. I called Heather, I called Carl. I was like, I don't know what to do. And they're like, it's up to you. We'll totally understand if you want to go to the funeral. And I was like, you know what? As much as I want to go, that is my past. That was 10 years ago. And I sent flowers and I called and, you know, gave my condolences. But I was like, I got to move forward. And there's just something, you know, again, it's one of those things that kicked me in the gut. It was like brutal for a couple weeks. It was like every day I would wake up and be like, he was dead. It's so crazy. But that's life, right? Like you said, you know, we all get knocked down, you pick yourself back up. So we do, and we enjoy these awesome moments that we get to have and appreciate that this is our job, if we can call it that. And